All right, let's go right to our guest. He is the co-director of Benghazi 9/11. And are you going to mention the Super Bowl? Do we have to? I'm mentioning. Thank you. I'm mentioning the interview with Bill O'Reilly and the president, which part 2 runs tonight. And a key part of that was the Benghazi question and questions from Bill O'Reilly. Who better to analyze them than Buzz Jacobs, again, co-director of Benghazi 9/11, Benghazi9-11.com. Buzz, welcome back.
Hi, Crane. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's begin. Here, Bill O'Reilly starts out the questioning, and he asks about Carter Ham. Benghazi happened September 11th, 2012. It was blamed on a video. The president has made a number of statements that he called it a terrorist attack, didn't call it a terrorist attack. Evidence has surfaced through 60 Minutes 2 days before the election, released on the back end, that he specifically went out of his way not to call it a terrorist attack. He told people he blamed it on a video. He promoted the person who lied to the American people, and that being Susan Rice. It wasn't a video. They knew from the beginning, ostensibly, that it was a terrorist attack, and this is where the question picks up. Libya, House Armed Services testimony, General Carter Ham, the general. Yes, all right, says President Obama. Security in Africa, yes. He testified that on the day that the ambassador was murder of the ambassador, 3 other Americans, and Woods, Doherty, and Stevens, and forgive me, I want to make sure I get the...
Sean Smith.
Yes, Sean Smith, pardon me. And we've seen their parents. We've seen people talk about them. Obviously, Americans who have been murdered by terrorists, and that's what this question zones in on. He testified on the day that the ambassador was murdered and 3 other Americans. All right, he told Secretary Panetta it was a terrorist attack. Shortly after General Ham said that, Secretary Panetta came in to the president. Here is the place where we pick up the interview. Roll it.
Did he tell you, Secretary Panetta, it was a terrorist attack?
You know what he told me was that there was an attack on our compound.
He didn't use the word terror?
In the heat of the moment, Bill, what folks are focused on is what's happening on the ground. Do we have eyes on it? How can we make sure our folks are secure?
I just want to get this on the record. Did he tell you it was a terror attack?
Bill, and what I'm answering your question. What he said to me was, we've got an attack on our compound.
No terror attack.
We don't know yet who's doing it. Understand my definition, Bill. When somebody is attacking our compound, that's an act of terror, which is how I characterized it the day after it happened.
Okay. So your response to that part of the answer, was the president telling the truth? Did he answer the question? The question was, did he call it a terrorist attack?
Well, no, he did not answer the question. He is playing semantic games, as he has been since 9/11 in 2012. And did the president use the words act of terror? Yes, he did use the words act of terror in his Rose Garden speech the day after the attack, but he used those words in a generic sense. The president never called it a terrorist attack, which is different. And for the better part of 2 weeks, his team, including his press secretary and Ambassador Rice, blamed the attack on a video. Plus, the day after the attack, the president told 60 Minutes, quote, "It's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved, but obviously it was an attack on Americans." Again, not using the word terrorist attack. The president, in my view, and this is part of an ongoing game that him and his administration seem to be playing, and that is they're trying to rewrite history and trying to shape it in a way that is different than the facts play out.
Okay, Buzz, real quick, I want to play that. You referenced it, and I think it's important to play what you just referenced. One, you said mentioned it generally in a Rose Garden speech, but then that was 4 paragraphs away from mentioning Benghazi specifically. It was speaking to general terrorism. So he didn't specifically call it terrorism in the Rose Garden speech, which Steve Croft of 60 Minutes that night said asked him directly about. And it's cut number 7. Roll it.
Mr. President, this morning you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack.
Right.
Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved, but obviously it was an attack on Americans. And we are going to be working with the Libyan government to make sure that we bring these folks to justice, one way or the other.
It's been described as a mob action, but there are reports that they were very heavily armed with grenades.
As I
that
said,
doesn't sound like your normal demonstration.
Right. As I said, we're still investigating exactly what happened. I don't want to jump the gun on this, but you're right that this is not a situation that was exactly the same as what happened in Egypt.
Okay, with your permission here, Buzz, I'm going to go to part 2 of his answer. We haven't cut anything out, just so that people can understand, because we really want to break this down, because what we are talking about is the president lying to the American people. And last night, I believe he did it again. That said, here the president picks up on his answer regarding was he informed that it was a terrorist attack from Secretary Panetta, who was told it was, from testimony coming from General Ham. Roll it.
So the question ends up being who, in fact, was attacking us.
But it's more than that, because of Susan Rice.
No.
It's more than that, because Susan Rice goes out and tells the world that it was a spontaneous demonstration off a videotape, but your commanders and the Secretary of Defense, it's a terror attack.
No,
Bill, as an American, I'm just confused.
And I'm trying to explain it to you if you want to listen. The fact of the matter is that people understood at the time something very dangerous was happening, that we were focused on making sure that we did everything we could to protect them. In the aftermath, what became clear was that the security was lax, that not all the precautions that needed to be taken were taken, and both myself and Secretary Clinton and others indicated as much. But at the moment, when these things happen, Bill, on the other side of the world,
it's the fog of war.
People don't know at the very moment exactly why something like this happens. And when you look at the videotape of this whole thing unfolding, this is not some systematic, well-organized process. You see...
It was heavy weapons used. And then...
So, Buzz? Your thoughts?
Unfortunately, Crane, yeah.
Yes.
Well, the president lied because he said that he and the secretary indicated that, that what became, he says what became clear was that the security was lax, and quote unquote, the Secretary Clinton and I indicated as much. Well, that's simply not true. I mean, that's just a total fabrication. He still doesn't. I mean, maybe last night was as close as he has come to taking responsibility for their failure to prepare. But for over 500 days, the president has not taken responsibility. They initially blamed the attack on the video. It didn't comport with their campaign narrative that Al Qaeda was defeated and on the run. And you go on. It's went on for months and months. And what the president said is unfortunately simply not true. And if you get, I don't know if you're going to play more clips of the video, so I don't want to jump ahead.
No, why don't I go right to it? Because here it is. He continues because Bill O'Reilly makes the comment, hey, heavy weapons coming in there, Mr. President. Roll it.
Heavy weapons coming in.
Bill, listen, I've gone through this, and we have had multiple hearings on it. What happens is you have an attack like this taking place, and you have a mix of folks who are just troublemakers. You have folks who have an ideological agenda.
Right.
You have some who are affiliated with terrorist organizations. You have some that are not. But the main thing that all of us have to take away from this is our diplomats are serving in some very dangerous places.
But
we've got to make sure that not only have we implemented all the reforms that were recommended by the independent agency, but we also have to make sure that we understand our folks out there are in a hazardous, dangerous situation.
I think everybody understands that.
No, but actually, not everybody does, because what ends up happening is we end up creating a political agenda on
Absolutely, and
something in
that was
which
my next question.
Democrats and Republicans should be unified in trying to figure out how are we going to protect people.
I got to get to.
All right. So, Buzz, he starts going to the area where he starts talking about how it's been politicized, not finding out what actually happened and fixing it. Your thoughts?
Well, that's totally outrageous because President Obama and his team misled America. Obama misleads America. Hillary Clinton pontificates from the witness chair saying, what difference does it make? She filibusters the questions. He talks about hearings, but when Secretary Clinton went to the Hill to testify, she would just filibuster every question, and we could never get straight answers. So you talk about politicization. If we didn't want to make a political issue out of Benghazi, the president would have said, "Okay, we need a bipartisan commission in Congress. I'm going to work with Congress. I'm going to make sure all the witnesses are available. I'm going to provide every bit of information. We're going to assess this and make sure everybody's safe in the future." That's not what he did. The president and his team lied, and what we don't know. He says what Secretary Panetta told him. And we don't know what the truth. What did Panetta tell him? Maybe Panetta started to tell him, Mr. President, it's a terrorist attack. Well, maybe he stuck his fingers in his ears and started screaming and said, I don't want to hear that because that doesn't comport with my campaign narrative, so don't tell me. And then it would be true for him to say that today, although I find it hard to believe. But
what has Panetta said specifically to that? Because my question is, you just went back to the first question, which is great, and I appreciate that. And this is what frustrates me, and as not as a conservative, not as a Christian, not as a Christian conservative, but as an American, simply as an American who sits there and says to myself, he's lying to the American people and he still hasn't answered what you just highlighted, Buzz, and I know it does for you as well. He never answered the question. Go ahead, sir.
And that's this game that they've been playing from day one. They don't answer the question. They change it. But because this issue has been dragged out for so long, and because the mainstream media and the White House press corps particularly continually fail to do their jobs and to hold the president accountable and the White House staff accountable on this issue, they get away with it. They're able to change the story just a little bit. Where if you just tuned in, you and I and your listeners, Crane, pay a lot of attention to this issue, so we can catch up. We can catch these nuances and know when the president is misleading us and lying to us. But there's probably a lot of people who don't realize that. So maybe if they just tuned in last night, they knew Benghazi's been covered. They knew there's been testimony in the Hill. They could believe what he's saying. But you got to get into the details and you got to explore the truth, just like you're doing, and playing the interviews from what he said last year and what he said now, and you can catch on to these things. It's the same thing that I mentioned last time was on your show, where they try to make this. They try to say it wasn't a terrorist attack because it wasn't core Al Qaeda, meaning that it wasn't directly from the original core group of Al Qaeda controlled from them. But in reality, we know that the attack was done by somebody who trained at a camp of Bin Laden. So if that's not Al Qaeda, I don't know what is. But they get away with these things because nobody's challenging them. And I really wish O'Reilly would have challenged him a little stronger.
Well, let's and here is the closing part to the Benghazi interview. Roll it.
The IRS, but I just want to say that your detractors believe that you did not tell the world it was a terror attack because your campaign didn't want that out.
Bill,
that's what they believe.
And they, because folks like you are telling them that.
I'm not telling them that. I'm asking you whether you were told it was a terror attack.
And what I'm saying is that is inaccurate.
All right.
We revealed to the American people exactly what we understood at the time. The notion that we would hide the ball for political purposes when a week later we all said, in fact, there was a terrorist attack taking place the day after I said it was an act of terror. That wouldn't be a very good cover-up if that's what we were.
I got to get to the.
Okay, Buzz, tell me specifically where the evidence, like evidence from Chris Hill, the man on the ground who contradicted their story. There's many contradictions to what he has said in the record, and O'Reilly, and I'm not criticizing per se because I recognize there are so many different ways. But there is a record, and it's not just his detractors. So that would be a point of level criticism if we take a good look at that. That said, your thoughts?
Right, and I'm not trying to be critical. It's a tough thing to go in there and ask the president on his turf, and especially one as a politician as good as him, where he can talk.
Right. And I'm not excusing it either, Buzz. I mean, just for the record, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm not excusing it. I just want people to realize, hey, there is evidence, and you've highlighted it, and that's a frustration for you. It's a frustration for me. Just like I said, I'm not. This is not about Christian or conservative. No, I'm always those people. I'm always offended. But I want people to know, as Americans, hey, this is huge. Go ahead, sir.
It's the truth. The General Ham, 4-star general, testified. He said, quote, I personally, he quote unquote said this was a terrorist attack. That is what he told Secretary Panetta that night. And the congressman who was asking that question said, if would you have advised as such if asked, would that be correct? That you advised it was a terrorist attack? And General Ham said, quote, well, and with General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Secretary Panetta, that is the nature of the conversation we had. Yes, sir. So is it believable that the Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, minutes before they walked into the Oval Office, were told by their combatant commander that it was a terrorist attack, that they were not going to tell the President of the United States that? I don't think so. I don't think that is believable. So do I think the President is lying to us and that there is reason for a cover-up? That's one reason. There's many, many reasons. I've written about it. I've talked about it. There is no question about it that they had plenty of reason and motive for a cover-up, and they still do, because we're talking about Barack Obama's legacy, and we're talking about Hillary Clinton's presidential ambition. So there's plenty of motive for it, and you are darn right that they are going to do everything they can to keep misleading the American public on this issue, because they have to.
And
once
for
you make
answers,
one lie, you can't stop.
And for answers, Benghazi9-11.com. I'll post it as always on the Facebook ASAP. Buzz Jacobs, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't. We're out of time, but thank you for joining us and giving us the truth, nothing but truth. Buzz Jacobs, Benghazi 9/11. Thank you, my friend. AFR Talk.